Ralph Adam Britsch was born in Ephraim, Utah on January 30th, 1912. His Swiss grandparents came to America to make a better life. They were young people who'd been engaged in Switzerland but were married in America. His Danish grandparents met on the boat coming to Utah. They came because of the LDS Church.
My grandfather, Jens Peter Larsen Breinholt, was born in Denmark in 1844. In a little town called Vinding, he learned the mason trade. When he was 20 years old, he was converted to Mormonism, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in 1868, he emigrated to Utah, to Sanpete Valley, with his bride-to-be, my future grandmother. He was only one of many skilled craftsmen, painters, woodworkers, masons, and others, who were drawn to these valleys of the mountains by their deep faith and by the hand of God. They had no way of knowing, these early builders, that soon they would join hundreds of other workmen in erecting such magnificent edifices as the Manti Temple.
When Ralph was born, his father was the editor of the Ephraim Enterprise, the local paper which he owned. His mother was a coach for local plays and gave many readings and took part in many plays. The family remained in Ephraim while his father studied law by correspondence. In 1917 and 18, they lived in Salt Lake while his father finished his law degree at the University of Utah. In 1920, they moved to Burley, Idaho, which was a new boom town because of a dam on the Snake River. Many lawyers moved in, and soon the boom went broke. They had a tough time financially, but Ralph had some good teachers. Hardin, his brother, always the businessman, arranged many jobs, like delivering papers, magazines, and so on. In 1924, they returned to Utah and moved to Manti. Ralph skipped the 7th grade and was very active in school. His senior year in high school, he was the student body president. He spent 2 years at Snow College, where he was the student body president there, and was also representative man. He was very active in dramatics and music. His brother Hardin worked in San Francisco after his Snow College, and Ralph had his first big trip when he visited him there. Growing up, his family had family home evening every night. His parents were great readers. Sometimes they read out loud to each other, but most of the time they all had their own choices. Without TV, reading was a wonderful pastime. His 2 years at BYU were filled with the same activities. His love for literature, dramatics, and music won out. He had thought seriously about studying law. He graduated with honors in 1933 and was lucky to find a teaching job in Gunnison, Utah. He earned $900 a year and saved half of it. He didn't have a car because he couldn't afford one. In the fall of 1935, he returned to BYU to do graduate work. It is true that Margaret Summerhays told me that Ralph Britsch was back to do graduate work and she wanted me to play for his lessons. We were constantly thrown together. I asked him to sing on a program I was in charge of, and I was assigned to play for the Cuckoo Quartet, which he was organizing. We practiced every day, and soon Ralph needed to sit on the end of the piano bench to get his part right. It worked. We were engaged by May. Ralph was hired spring quarter to teach at Provo High School. We were married December 18th, 1936. Our oldest son, Todd, was born September 23rd, 1937. In the spring, Ralph was hired to teach at BYU, and we went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. He taught all freshman English classes. Our children were arriving at an alarming rate. Lanny was born November 16th, 1938. By 1940, Charlotte made her appearance. And that summer, we all went to Seattle, where he attended the University of Washington, and by February, Merlene was born. During the Second World War, he taught mainly the Army engineer boys based at the Y. There were mostly girls in his classes otherwise. Although he had 4 children, he would have been drafted if the Y hadn't made a case that he was needed. One of the things that kept his teaching fresh was his constant enlarging of his courses. He developed courses in American literature, then English Victorian literature, and world classics. His broad expertise in literature, art, and music helped him plan the first course in humanities and comparative literature. He always believed that if the students didn't do well in these classes, he hadn't taught them well. He received the Carl G. Mazur Award for Teaching Excellence in 1971, the English Award in 1976 and 7, Distinguished Teaching Award in 1978. He served as chairman of the English Department, acting dean of the College of Humanities, and the first chairman of the Humanities Department. Ralph's early church leadership activities were mainly in music and drama. Now backing up to when he was a deacon. His mother was always very active and always took Ralph to church. When he was 12, he started passing the sacrament like his friends. Some observant sister told him he shouldn't be doing that because he hadn't been baptized. When he was 15, his father asked him if he really wanted to become a member. He said yes. His father cried. Ralph never knew whether he was sorry that he hadn't agreed to it before or whether he was sorry he was going to join the church. In 1945, he was chosen by Greg Austin to become the first counselor in the new Park Ward bishopric. He served there for 14 years, 8 of them as bishop. He was the bishop in charge of building the new chapel. He spent countless hours working on the building and dreaming up ways to pay for it. After his release, he became a high counselor and then a counselor in the Utah State Presidency. The chapel was dedicated by President David O. McKay in 1955. During our years in Park Ward, he directed a male chorus, the Couriers of Song. We had many fine singers in the ward, and we sang in many wards and put on shows for money for the building fund. They were active for about 15 years. Many of our closest friends were in the group. In 1950-51, we spent a year in Oklahoma, where Ralph did graduate work. We lived on an old Air Force base in an old barracks. Lanny especially loved the airport. Royden was 2 years old. Merlene was in the 3rd grade, Charlotte in the 5th, Lanny in the 6th, and Todd in the 8th grade. We went to church in Oklahoma City to a branch. There were only 3 Mormon families in Norman, and now I have heard that there are 2 stakes. One of the great family experiences was building a Swiss cabin in Snake Creek in about 1961. Royden was about 12 years old, but he wanted to go every day to be with his older brothers and his dad. Ralph's uncles were builders, and he had worked with them in his teenage years. He always loved building. By fall of 1961, Todd had gone to Germany, and Lanny was engaged to Joanne. Ralph loved to travel and plan trips. We had some memorable trips to Europe, to every state but Alaska, and we went to the South Pacific several times. On our Greek island trip, we were at the captain's party, drinking our ginger ale, when a young woman came over and said, "You have drinks like Mormons. Could you be Mormons?" She had heard the missionaries in Holland. In 1972, the Provo Temple was dedicated. We began working there in May of 1972. Ralph became a sealer about 1984 and was able to marry many of our grandchildren. He worked there until 1992. I worked there until 1997. Midway is such a peaceful, beautiful valley. We fell in love with it when we built our cabin there. So we decided to flip our schedules around and have our home base there and our work and our temple service in Provo. We built a home there and moved there in 1976. Our first Sunday was a fast day, and many of Ralph's past students mentioned him in their testimonies. He was made the choir director that day, I think. They didn't have a choir at that time. Our first meeting produced a fine group with talent on every part. Probably Ralph's outstanding contribution to the community was writing, producing, and directing the Swiss Day shows. He created some spectacular scenery and fine scripts. We produced it for 7 years. In January 1981, we left for our mission to Tonga. We had some great experiences there, including my broken femur. This enabled us to spend the other half of our mission in New Zealand, where we worked at the Temple Visitor Center. On Labor Day 1985, after everything was put away from our last Swiss Days show, we moved back to Provo. Ralph never wanted for something to keep his interest in life. He could read and listen to his music indefinitely. Sometimes we questioned that the music needed to be full volume, but he wanted the sound of the concert hall. He was a good builder and designer. He created a very attractive deck on the north side of our house. Grandchildren were his special delight. All his life he had hoped to have grandchildren. I think when Steph lived with us as a 1-year-old, she spent most of the day on his lap. Sherry was another he had an affair with. He really loved them all. He and Dan had a special love for each other. He called his grandpa very often when his grandpa was sick. For 4 years, while Lanny and family were in Hawaii, their dog Lily lived with us. She could even tell if we spelled the word walk, what was up. She helped us get our exercise. In 1992, when he was 80 years old, he was honored at Snow College as a distinguished alumni. He always felt that his years at Snow were well spent. There were only 5 in his German class for 2 years. He loved Miss Phillips, who was an inspiring English teacher. He was also given an alumni award by BYU in 1992. The award picture he was given at Snow was a picture of the building his grandfather Breinholt had built. We were fortunate that through all these years of choirs, quartets, men's choruses, and shows, we could work together because I got to be the accompanist. It was fitting that we had the Humanities College Men's Chorus and the men from the Parkwood Couriers of Song sing at his funeral on July 9th, 1994. He died July 6th, 1994. This is a clip of Grandpa talking to one of his grandchildren when he had been diagnosed with cancer.
hope you're enjoying your nursing program. I'm sure that it keeps you busy along with your family responsibilities and your church jobs and all this kind of thing. I don't know how much longer you're going to have to go on. How much longer is it, Carl?
For another 2 years.
Oh, well, that'll be great. Then you can come and nurse your your grandfather-in-law. By that time, I shouldn't need any nursing. I should be completely well.
Good.